Welcome to the Veriditas Podcast, where we explore heterodox thoughts on politics, sex and culture with an exciting lineup of international guests. I am your host, Dr. Petra Bueskens, and I'll be asking guests, what is it that distinguishes this political and cultural moment? Why isn't the world making sense anymore? What is reality in an algorithmically driven world? How can we regenerate our psyches and societies?
Hi, everyone. It's been a few weeks, and I'm sorry it's taken me a while to get up my next podcast. I've moved house, and it was gargantuan. And I've moved from a big house into a little house. I've moved from having a big shed to having no shed. So it's this colossal exercise in shedding, which seems symbolic. It's kind of where I'm at right now. So thank you for bearing with me. I was reflecting on how I like to disappear from, I guess, the internet broadly, social media, people, lives, and what that means. And I was thinking about a Winnicott quote that I first read actually on Michael Lernick's website, but it's a Winnicott quote that he found resonant, and that is the tension that the artist feels. Although I'm not an artist, I certainly work creatively and relate to this tension. The tension that the artist feels between wanting to cocoon off and create and kind of be in stillness and quiet, and wanting to connect with others and wanting to share one's work. I just dug up the quote. It is, quote, "In the artist of all kinds, one can detect an inherent dilemma which belongs to the coexistence of two trends, the urgent need to communicate and the still more urgent need not to be found." D.W. Winnicott. And I certainly feel that tension. And of course, in the internet age, we're supposed to be on all the time, on. And although I've listened to a lot of podcasts while moving and lifting boxes, I haven't been producing anything. But of course, I'm always thinking. And so my latest podcast is an interview I did 4 weeks ago now, or maybe 3 weeks ago, with Laura Delano. And we'd been planning this podcast for really since the start of the year, but since Laura's book was published. And funnily enough, I was messaging with her because we met at the Brownstone conference, and then I fell asleep with my headphones on, very bad. And I heard Tucker Carlson talking and Laura talking, and I turned it into a dream because I'd been messaging with Laura. And when I woke up, I realized that, in fact, Laura had been on Tucker Carlson while we were talking about organizing an interview. And I was kind of blown away. It was surreal. It was very surreal. So I feel lucky and blessed to have this interview with Laura because she's a highly sought after speaker now, having published her book, Unshrunk, a memoir on her psychiatric diagnosis and essentially her unshrinking herself and deprogramming herself and demedicating herself and freeing herself psychologically and even spiritually. It's such a moving book. I highly encourage listeners to buy the book. It's beautifully written. Laura's a really fantastic writer. And although it's a memoir, it's also a kind of excoriating critique of the psychiatric industrial complex. And it's also quite sociological, like it's peppered with a lot of studies and stats. And so it's a really meaty read, like it's a nourishing read because you're getting the kind of, what would you call it? You're getting the personal memoir piece that's kind of really enjoyable to read and enthralling. And incredibly sad in places too, actually, deeply sad. I cried many times reading the book. But you've also got a book that is quite academic in its knowledge base and research foundation on kind of what's wrong with everything from the so-called chemical imbalance theory, which has been proven to be false and yet is still widely accepted in the public domain, through to the fact that, a lot of the antidepressants are no more effective than placebos, and then the kind of depressing statistics of how many people are on psych meds now in the West. And of course, as Laura points out, in that time frame that everyone kind of started to get on, when I say everyone, obviously I'm using that loosely, but in which the medication uptake has increased, well, in fact, mental illness has only increased apace. So there's actually a relationship between these two. So we talk a lot about iatrogenic harm in the interview, or harm that is caused by the so-called cure. So I won't speak more now. Just wanted to give a little overview because it's some weeks ago that I recorded this interview, and I have 2 others I need to transcribe as well. So I better giddy up, and thanks for your patience. And sorry, I just disappeared. I had to do that sometimes. Okay. Enjoy the interview.
Yes.
Hi, Laura. It's lovely to see you.
You too. It's been way too long.
It has, yeah.
We have a fancy camera. Sorry. Go ahead.
Let's see. No, you go.
I was just gonna say the only reason I'm clear is because we have this fancy camera that Cooper has insisted we use because we're doing a lot of stuff for the nonprofit.
Yeah.
I'm tech clueless though, so he has to always set it up.
I'm tech clueless too. And I did something to my background, and I can't change it. So I'm going to have to figure it out. But yeah, you inspired me. Anyway, it's so good to see you. I feel like the last
You
time I saw
too.
you, I was just laughing and jet lagged. Every time I saw you, I was laughing and jet lagged.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was so fun. I'm so glad we had that time together at the conference. I can't believe that was like 10 months ago or however long it's been. It feels like it was yesterday, but it's almost a year ago. That's crazy, whatever it is.
Yeah, it does feel like yesterday. I agree. And I loved like getting voice messages from you for a little while. And it was that, that post-conference buzz where it sort of still feels really alive, and then it takes time. And now I think, I'm going to have to fly back, but it just feels like a big thing to do. It's epic. I don't know if I can do it every year, but I'd love to, because it just felt like there was so much camaraderie there. And you guys have got the population and enough dissidents that are kind of, we've got a much smaller group. It just doesn't have the same feel to it that conference.
We're lucky. I mean, for all the shittiness of this country, I feel very lucky that there is such a vibrant community, and that so much of it has kind of because Brownstone's in our town, like Jeffrey's in our town, like so much of the energy is just literally in our backyard. We feel really lucky.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. The conference was magical. It was just like having a real ball and dressing up in my Temu dress. I only told you it was a Temu dress.
And Temu's like long gone, with all the Trump Cooper was so sad because Cooper was a total Temu guy. And then what was it, pre-tariff? I don't know. Maybe it was even before the tariffs. I feel like it was a while ago. It just overnight gone. From the U.S. market. I'm just trying to keep one foot in. And who knows at this point, since I've been on Tucker, if I even am.
Must be guilty by association now, surely. Because you look to all the figures in that movement.
Yeah. It's so sad.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
That.
And just to say, I thought it was such a coup that you got Tucker. And I genuinely, because I've been having trouble sleeping, because I've been in grief this year. And it was going in my head, and I'd been thinking about you. And I always listen to Tucker. I love Tucker. I mean, I just consider him one of the most honest journalists around. So I'd have to say it's probably my favorite show at the moment.
I'm the same.
On the down low, although my bestie that I've had since we were late teenagers, she's fully on board. So, I literally have lost nearly everyone with a breakup, my COVID stance and my trans stance. And I didn't really milk it to become whatever they call that, the Streisand effect. I just felt I didn't have the energy. And I don't like that either, because that's actually just the algorithm winning from the conflict. But if you don't do that with the conflict, then actually there's this, there's the high profile cancelled person. But I think there's a whole other strata of people that just kind of get pushed out. I'm starting to interview
Yes.
the COVID dissidents in Australia now, doctors and different people on the podcast who just lost their
That's
job
awesome.
and they didn't become
Yeah.
superstars on social media. They
Yeah.
just lost their jobs and they're suffering.
Oh my gosh, it's such an important invisible group, and
Mm.
yeah, I'm so glad that you're focusing on raising up the voices of those people. Yeah, because I mean, to be doubly screwed where you have that happen to you and then you're not able to use that in any way to help you chart a new course. You're just like disappeared from
That's right.
society and your career. It's like it's so horrible.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
losing all their friends. Like I get approached to work with people as a therapist in that space. And I thought that could weave us into the therapy conversation because I can't talk to anybody. So, yeah. So I thought,
Great.
let's just drum roll. 1, 2, 3. We're officially starting. All that'll just be cut out. Hello, Laura.
Okay. Hey, Petra.
Great to see you. And thank you for coming on. I'm so thrilled that you decided to
It's
come
such
on
an honor to be
this.
here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, great. It's been a little while. Okay, so I thought just to go straight in, tell us your story. I read your book. I found it profoundly moving and some of the articles around it. And I just wanted to give you the floor to tell your story, perhaps starting with that evocative experience in front of the mirror at 13. And what that meant and where you were at that age. My son's almost 13, so I was thinking about that.
It's definitely, for a lot of us, it's a tough age to be a human. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. So I grew up in Connecticut in the Northeast US in a town that had, quite a lot of affluence and a lot of economic resources in it. And so I had the kind of childhood that, was surrounded by material plenty. Went to private school, lived in a comfortable home. My family was able to provide for all of my basic needs. But it also meant that there was just this intense kind of pressure in the air around all of us growing up there that basically taught us that to be a good person in life is to excel, succeed, be high achieving. So I just never saw. I grew up just seeing success everywhere, and so I didn't even realize that there was another option or that there was anything beyond performance in life. I just thought that was what life was about, and so I happened to be the kind of kid who was good at school, by which I mean, I could memorize and regurgitate information. I enjoyed the mundane task of doing homework and taking quizzes and tests. I just was the kind of kid who liked that and was good at it. So I moved through school pretty easily. And then at 13, there I was, this kid who was accomplished on paper, good grades, good athlete, a student running the middle school as the president. And I just ended up having this profound experience looking in the mirror, brushing my teeth, in which I lost touch with time and space and my body and really reality. And I was just staring at this girl in the mirror. And I just was, who is she? Who is she? Who is she? And I just realized this is a stranger and I don't know this girl. And when I came back into my body, I was terrified by what had just happened. I didn't have any frames of reference to help me make sense of that out of body kind of experience. And so I concluded that what this all meant was that I was basically like a fake robot, just performing my life. I didn't have an authentic self. I had no agency over my life. I was just programmed by all of these adults to perform well. And this realization was just so felt unbearable to sit with. I couldn't just unknow it. And so I tried to suppress it and continue on with my life, doing all the good student things I was doing, but I eventually ended up just completely breaking down because I couldn't hold that realization. I couldn't hold it in anymore. And I began acting out, yelling, screaming. I blamed a lot of the pain that I was feeling on my parents because I felt trapped, couldn't escape this life of performance. And so I was at home, I just became this menace, basically. And I also, I was cutting myself, and I was just terrifying my poor parents who didn't know what to do with me.
You were lashing out, angry.
Yeah.
In a rage.
But then outside the home, I was still keeping it together. So it was just total disconnect. Yeah. And my poor parents eventually were just so afraid that they sent me to a professional because, of course, that's what so many parents are kind of taught to do. If your kid is struggling, you don't know what to do here. You need to send them to someone who has studied about this and studied this and is an expert in this. So that's what eventually happened.
And in some ways, parents are considered negligent if they don't do that. I mean, that's the pressure.
Exactly. And this this all happened in the mid-90s. So it was actually the very beginning of the phenomenon that I think is ubiquitous today, where parents are regularly disempowered by the kind of expert industry around them. But so back then, it wasn't that visible in the public discourse, mental health awareness and seeking help and all of these messages that now parents are basically just inculcated with all the time. They weren't really there yet. That was all just beginning in the 90s in the US, this real push to kind of train Americans to defer their own authority to medical experts. So the fact that my parents did end up sending me to a therapist, I think more than anything speaks to just how there was nothing else. There were no other options around them. I think they were quite, it was a secret thing. We didn't really talk about it with anyone because this wasn't in the discourse, is your kid getting help? Oh, well, I've sent him to this doctor, and no one was talking about that. So it was a secret thing that we did, but I think it was out of desperation. They just saw no other place to turn.
Yeah. I'm thinking it was a transition from therapy being especially psychoanalytically informed, like a bourgeois pastime. You think about the Woody Allen films, to being like a medical industrial complex where it's almost mandatory for any kid that acts out even just a little bit to be psychiatrized and medicalized. But adults too. I mean, it strikes me adults as well. It's just now the normative condition for emotionality, the response to emotionality.
Yes, it's so true. And it's almost strange if you don't have a therapist.
Yeah, it's true, especially in the middle class.
Yeah, well, the conflating of care, support, help with treatment, I think, has been so effective. And I see it happen here too, where the very real struggling and suffering and pain that people are feeling, given the time that we're in, obviously there's a lot to feel despairing and anxious and terrified about. And so people have this idea that, their struggling fellow citizens, it should be their right to access care, and that they just assume that means medical treatment or other kinds of professional services. And it doesn't even occur to a lot of people that the care and help that people might need doesn't necessarily come from these industries. People don't even realize that there could be other options. And so sometimes I just want to ask, well, what about the right to not access, the right to not get care, to not get treatment, because it's so forced upon us in all these different contexts so much of the time that people just assume the benevolent thing to do is to fight for access. Sometimes it's about, what about building alternatives to this treatment? Like that's what people really need. But if people don't think that because we just are in such a professionalized, medicalized time.
I agree. That's a really insightful point. And it ties into that iatrogenic harm too, that the medical industrial complex is part of the problem. It's part of a societal worldview, let's say, a mechanistic worldview, problem, reaction, solution methodology that you see is part of the problem that leads to the mental illness in the first place. And
Exactly.
so this idea that you throw money at something, governments say, we've allocated this much money to mental health as if that's how it's achieved. Yeah. And yet you're
Yep.
right. The propaganda around it has been so effective that now people don't even question it. I noticed too, there's just slogans everywhere. I don't know if you have that, but I walk around the Lake Wendouree, very close to me with my dog. And I've noticed that some of the seating now has embedded in it like cutouts, "Are you okay?" So that is a day here for depression. "Are you okay?" So it's not even just a seat anymore. It has to have a kind of mental health propaganda sign.
Wow.
And then as more and more people do this "Are you okay?" day, or, it's like pronouns or any of that stuff, it becomes a form of virtue signaling that's absolutely hollow. There's less and less real connection and more of this sloganeering.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. That's wild about the benches. I see it on the inside of bathroom stalls.
Yeah.
Those, those kinds of advertisements. But yeah, that even a beautiful outdoor space, you can't have a break from the bombardment of the marketing. And yeah, it's really, not to skip ahead, but what I've noticed since my book has come out is that a lot of the anger that I'm getting from what you might call um, the more left wing part of the population is that my book, which is a story of eventually rejecting mental health care, is going to be used as a justification to cut mental health services to people. And, the question that comes up for me when I hear this critique, besides the fact that there's like, where's the evidence for that, please? Is
Yeah.
that, I feel grief because, historically the left analysis is strongly critical of corporate institutional power and how it corrupts and destroys authentic relationships in local communities, and how it destroys the power of mutual aid. And yet somehow we're in this time in which it's become seen as right wing, quote unquote, whatever these terms even mean now. I don't know. It's all blown up, but it's become right wing to question pharmaceutical and professional care. Somehow it's this wild inversion, and I feel quite disoriented much of the time when I'm trying to engage with it.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, even if you talk a little bit about reading postmodernism in the book, and I was reading it too, albeit a little bit earlier perhaps, but it's Foucault 101 to analyze the birth of the clinic and the social construction of the, mental patient. And I mean, a lot of the early sociologies too were really interested in the interactional self and the construction of selves in medicalized contexts. Ivan Illich's work, and and it's as if it just came from nowhere, and yet there's been a long-standing critique of medicine and the history of medicine and the construction of the patient, and yet I just find it fascinating because they were all leftist intellectuals that were making these arguments, and they were a critique of authoritarian control. And I find it interesting that that's been lost. And I think
there's an
my own
amnesia.
sense is it's the professionalization of the left. So the left used to be the critics who weren't in power when the neocons were forever. And then I think when the left moved from being a news story or a counterculture to being the establishment, they morphed into these roles. And the worst element of the left is a kind of authoritarian control for your own good. And I think many of us on the left didn't really see that happening. Although, I mean, I felt it in different ways. When I was doing my PhD, I felt it around what you could study and what you couldn't. Already, to talk about motherhood, my PhD was on motherhood, started to become problematic. And in a way, that's what you've touched. Because, I mean, I noticed there was an article in, not the early profile of you in the New Yorker, which I did look up, but I mean the one in the Washington Post, was it? Or
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You mean the recent book review?
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yes.
right. So maybe tell us, I wanted to get back to your story, but maybe tell us a little bit about that, what they were saying.
Yeah. Well, and I actually haven't read I haven't actually read the whole thing. I've seen little snippets of it, and it's been described to me by others. But what I recall in this book review that came out, I think sometime in March after my book came out, was that I was accused of being basically dangerous, and that my story would be used as kind of, I think the phrase was a Maha manifesto on mental health. And so I was immediately politicized. You know, my book was immediately politicized in this review as a way to discredit the message in it by saying this is the story. This is a story that is going to harm people by, leading them to think that they don't need medical care, that they don't need doctors. And that I can't remember, that much more about it, but it was a very angry review. And it wasn't even really about my book. It was more about me. And funnily enough, I can't verify this, but my understanding is that the reviewer, who isn't employed by the Washington Post, apparently wrote a book maybe a decade ago that was about how children are under-medicated, that's the problem, that they're not medicated enough. So this isn't necessarily a writer who had an unbiased perspective on my story, which is, of course, about rejecting medication eventually.
How on earth could someone promulgate the idea that children should be more medicated? I mean, it's just unethical. I can't even see a rationale for that that's even vaguely okay.
Yeah, well, again, I think it speaks to this theme we're talking about of the conflation of care with pharmaceutical treatment. That people just, I think it's just the symbol of the pill has become so all powerful as, it represents love and benevolence and compassion. Mm-hmm. And people just don't even realize that's how they've come to view it. It's just like so deep in them that's what a pill symbolizes. Therefore, any challenge to a pill is a challenge. Is you basically saying you don't care about the struggles of other people, which is a wild conflation, of course.
Oh, completely. It's running two things together that are completely separate. But also, I think the other thing I've noticed, not only with the response to your work, but I saw it in the home birth space as well, and in other spaces, it's that people who had a positive experience, a drug-free home birth, as I did, with an independent midwife, are seen as like imposing impossible standards on other women, or somehow being anti-women who needed an intervention. And I don't know about you, but my view is we need hospitals for emergencies. It's just that I don't think a natural birth is an emergency by definition. It's not anti to want to do it in a way that our bodies were evolved for and prepared for.
Totally. It's a perfect analogy to the story in my book, where when you have an experience, a personal experience that involves not participating in the medical industrial complex, that's interpreted as a threat, an insult. You're shaming people who've had a different experience. I'm called a pill shamer all the time. You are shaming people who take psychiatric medications simply by sharing your story of deciding to stop medications. Just like for you, and I also had a home birth that was not medicalized, and I've had the same experience in conversations where I can feel that me just sharing about my birth experiences feels like an insult. And that's such a tragedy, because of course, as women, we should be, feeling camaraderie, solidarity, support with one another. And from my view is I want for every woman to have the experience of giving birth in a way that helps her feel most in her power and her agency and her autonomy. Similarly, with a woman who's struggling and emotionally, I want her to have support that she feels like she is, actively choosing, and that feels nourishing and vitalizing for her. And maybe for some of them, that's taking a pill. For some women, it's having birth in a medicalized setting. For me, it's about informed choice. Do they have an awareness of basic human biology, of the risks of a medicalized birth, of alternatives to a medicalized birth. If they have all that information, they have resources, they feel in their power, then wherever they choose to give birth, that's my view on it. But yet, for those of us who choose a non-medical path, we're told we're cruel and intolerant and judgmental and shaming of others. I just don't, it's wild. I don't get it. And, maybe I do get it in the sense that I think a lot of these reactions are from a place of fear, and fear can distort your capacity to reason. And so maybe, I have compassion for these reactions that we get. But yeah, it leaves me feeling grief that because I think it speaks to how effectively disconnected people have been from each other, that they hear personal stories as insults or threats to them.
Yeah, I agree. And it's this locating outside the self of the solution. And I think when people locate the solution within, like, I can give birth, my body was evolved for this. I remember having a similar discussion with a woman a generation older around breastfeeding. And it got a little bit heated because she wanted to say that she was incapable of breastfeeding. And I accepted that was her reality, but I think we're evolved to be able to do that. So while there are a small number of women who can't breastfeed or can't give birth, it's actually very small. And yet, because our bodies were evolved for this, and yet we're not really allowed to say that. So I'm sort of, I guess, jumping out of the relativist position and saying, I think it is preferable to have a natural birth. I accept people's choice, but I think it's a free rite of passage from nature. And the difference between a natural birth and one that is heavily medicalized, and I'm not talking about an emergency where you needed it, but where just the normative system derails women. And I will say, in my therapy practice, it's really common that women need to unpack their birth stories because they were traumas. Now we have new terms in the literature like obstetric violence. That's so common, it's almost normative. Not quite, but almost. And so I think we need to be able to talk about that. And if people are going to say, you think you're superior or whatever, I don't care anymore. It's not a superiority complex. It's simply that we need to be able to say that actually you have the capacity to do this by and large, and you will benefit in innumerable ways, physiologically, emotionally, your capacity to bond. And I think we need to be able to say that. Yeah.
It's such a good point. And I concur. And I think, how can that message, the fact that message you just shared, which, at its core is about, power, capacity, strength, possibility, the fact that is heard as a threat, I think like that phenomenon right there, and I hear it all the time in the psychiatric drug context, this idea that that it is possible to navigate intense emotional pain without so-called treating it with a pill. I view that message as something that's inspiring and hopeful and full of possibility and beauty. And so the fact that it's so often seen the opposite, I think, is itself worth like really unpacking as a culture. Why is that message? Why does that feel like a problematic message to you? It should feel the opposite. And I do think it's, to return to the topic of iatrogenesis, I think it speaks to just how disabled we have been in our communities as a society by medicalized discourse, because it should feel second nature to us as humans to live in alignment with our basic, like how we've evolved over countless millennia. That shouldn't feel like a threatening concept, and the fact that it does speaks to how disempowered, disabled, disconnected we've been from our nature and from each other, which of course is one of the themes in my book that I really wanted to leave people with, that the disability, so to speak, doesn't live inside of your body or inside of your brain. We've been disabled, disconnected, made dysfunctional, quote unquote, by the culture, not by something faulty in our bodies.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I just love, you're so articulate in how you express it. I agree. It's the paradox is that it's that discourse is part of an ideology and a philosophy and a way of being that creates the very problem it's purporting to solve, hence the iatrogenesis. Actually, do you want to define that word? Because it's not a standard word that everyone's familiar with.
Yeah, it means harm caused by treatment. So doctor-induced, treatment-induced harm. And just as you said, it's this kind of paradoxical phenomenon. Well, at least the way that Ivan Illich wrote about it in his book Medical Nemesis, there are different layers of iatrogenesis. There's the kind of physical iatrogenesis where at the individual level, a so-called treatment causes harm to your body, like an adverse drug effect, for example. And then there are kind of broader layers of iatrogenesis that pan out to, the local level and more broadly at the societal level, where a system that is designed or that's marketed as being about helping solve a problem actually creates more of that very problem to begin with. So he talked about this in the context of schooling and how, your conventional kind of institutional school is seen as a place where young people go to learn and expand their thinking and their mind and their ideas. And yet it often ends up actually doing the very opposite, where it trains young people to be compliant, deferential, unquestioning, kind of passive. Same with the medical industry. Oh, you turn to this because you're sick and you want to feel healthy again. But this medical industry often actually creates more problems with your so-called health than you had before, and then offers you further treatments for them. So this paradoxical system inducing more harm that it's telling everyone it's actually treating.
That could be a good segue back into your story. So, I was thinking about it, how you were kind of given this label at 13. So you were diagnosed. Do you want to perhaps talk about what you were diagnosed with? Because one of the most evocative, your whole book is just replete with powerful experiences and messages and analyses and information and statistics. So it's just such an amazing book. It's so fantastic. But in there, you talk about being psychiatrized and kind of cutting your adolescent and young adult teeth on, like, at a time when really your brain is rapidly growing and you're learning how to be an adult, on being a patient, and that what you had become was a patient. And I just thought, wow, that's I felt very sad also. And then I thought the way in which you untangled that from this position here at sort of 27 to 33 or something when you're healing was really powerful. So do you want to talk about that perhaps from the diagnosis, which you initially reject, and then kind of it comes back, and perhaps talk a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So after that mirror experience that I talked about at the beginning, at first I was sent to a therapist, and then eventually that therapist recommended to my parents that I see a psychiatrist because I was, my problems were too serious for her to deal with alone. So I was sent to a psychiatrist. By then I was 14, and within one session, and people often don't believe this when they read the book, they're like, how does this really happen? Within one session with the psychiatrist, to whom I poured out all my pain and all about the anger and the acting out and the, how out of control I felt and cutting myself and all of it. I just poured it all out. And she told me by the end of the session that this was all symptomatic of an incurable illness called bipolar disorder. Incurable. I would have this for the rest of my life. She said, this isn't something that will go away. You'll have it for the rest of your life, but you can manage it with medication. So basically, don't worry. This is manageable. And, of course, as a 14-year-old, it didn't occur to me to say, how do you know this? Can you prove it? You didn't do any brain scans or lab tests. It didn't occur to me. I was a kid. but I also instinctively knew that this was wrong. I knew out right away that this was absurd. What was wrong was this environment that I was in and this pressure I felt, and the very rigid kind of boxes of expectation that I had been boxed in, that I'd been, imprisoned in as a girl. I knew all of that was the problem.
So you were cognizant of that at 14?
Oh, totally. I mean, I was, from a very young age, was aware of the absurdity of the, the idea that as a girl, I was meant to like to play with dolls and wear pink and be polite. I was a so-called tomboy growing up, and I wore boys' clothes, and I wrestled, and I played ice hockey, and I knew that it was absurd that was seen as something that boys did. I was, why can't I do these things? So I had that awareness. But yeah, after that psychiatrist diagnosed me, she immediately put me on 2 medications, 2 drugs that are marketed as medications.
Yeah.
Prozac.
Let's be clear in our language. 2 drugs.
Yeah. Well, yeah. To these 2 drugs, Prozac and Depakote. And I'm not sure what the brand name is for Depakote in Australia, but divalproic sodium, which is actually an anti-epileptic drug, an anticonvulsant, but it's used often as a so-called mood stabilizer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's put right on these drugs. And I did everything I could to not take them in high school. I managed to avoid them mostly. I went away to boarding school. I didn't take them there. But by the time I got to college, I was still stuck in this performance game. I went to Harvard, I felt so trapped still. I really spun out as an 18-year-old and wasn't sleeping, doing a lot of stuff.
Sorry to interject. You left home. So you resisted in your teenage years, but kept going quite functionally at school. But at home, you were angry and upset, and you were sort of not taking the meds. I remember because I read your book in April now, but you were sort of in your room spitting it out from memory and not having it. Is that right?
Yeah, that when I was the first year that I was on them, I was living at home, and so that's when I would hide them and throw them down the sink. But then I went away to boarding school for the last 3 years of high school.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so that was when I just stopped engaging I stopped seeing a psychiatrist. I didn't take the meds at all. I just hid them in my desk, and no one really asked me about it. My parents didn't follow it. We just kind of pretended it hadn't happened. So I managed to not really take them much at all through the rest of high school because I was away at boarding school. Sometimes on vacations when I'd come home and I'd see the doctor, but for the most part, I didn't take them.
Mm-hmm.
But then I ended up, staying stuck in this performance game and this elite education industry and not knowing how to get out of it. And so I got in early to Harvard, and I just was hoping that I was wrong about this whole thing, and that, once I'd get to a school like Harvard, I'd finally feel good about myself, and I'd finally feel okay. And that, this critique of the absurdity of school would fall away, and I'd realized I made a big mistake and it would all be good. I just hoped so much that would happen, and it didn't. And so that's when I really spun out, was my first year of university.
You weren't sort of, because it's such an elite institution, so difficult to get into. Like, my understanding is 1% of kids get into Harvard or something that apply even, or like it's pretty small, because my daughter's looked into it. She's 16 now. That was what I mentioned to you at the conference, who loves musicals. And it's like just a really small rate. So that didn't give you any satisfaction, I guess, because the performance game, as you call it, whether you're winning at it or losing at it, it's kind of its own entity, that's defining your life in ways that are problematic. But you weren't placated by winning at that game. And you were, like, you're a champion squash player. You were highly achieved in all these ways. That our culture values.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best way I could put it is that on paper I felt like I'd accomplished something, and so in that removed way, just intellectually, I could say to myself, yeah, you've worked really hard in school and sports your whole life, and now it's paying off and you've gotten in. But at an emotional, deeper, almost spiritual level, I didn't feel any sense of satisfaction or or integration. That's the level where I didn't feel it. And that, of course, was the big disconnect through my adolescence. Was on paper, intellectually, I kind of had it all together and had, quote unquote, and did everything well, quote unquote. But in my heart, in this more intangible realm of my humanity, I just felt empty, total emptiness and alone, and like I didn't fit into the world. So that, and of course that disconnect was what led me to really like break down and lose it, freshman year of university. And I spun out into such a state of despair and hopelessness that this was all that was in store for me, was just feeling empty, like life was meaningless. Like there was nothing deeper that was driving me to want to live. It was just this profound, like, existential apathy. It maybe isn't the word, but it was at an existential level that I lost hope. And that was when I then kind of said to myself, gosh, maybe that psychiatrist was right all those years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no other explanation I can come up with for why I want to die. So it was from age 18 to 27 that I then became this professional patient that you said earlier. That is what became my purpose and my meaning. I had this life that felt empty and lonely. But now, if I'm actually bipolar, this gives me something to build my life around. I can develop a sense of purpose by treating my illness, by being a good patient, by building deep connections with all these professionals who are trying to help me. It just filled that void. Becoming a patient did.
Yeah. It's really powerful the way you described that it filled a void, but that essentially every young adult needs to cut their teeth on something experiential to develop an identity.
Yeah. Well, and in the case of becoming a psychiatric patient, that identity requires you to disconnect from yourself, from your instincts, from your body and its messages, both because you are being taught at the kind of conceptual level, you're being taught that there's something fundamentally defective in your brain, and therefore your mind, and therefore your consciousness. So you can't trust yourself, you can't trust your thoughts, you can't trust your emotions, you can't trust your instincts, because they're symptoms of an illness and you're sick and you need to defer to these outside experts. And then, of course, there's also the pharmacological layer when you're being put on these powerful psychoactive chemicals that are marketed as, antidepressant medications or mood stabilizing medications. These drugs are acting on these basic systems of your body that shape not just your emotions, but like every facet of your humanity. I mean, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, these neurotransmitter systems control like everything, being a functioning human. And so when those are being interfered with, you also you literally can't listen to your body's signals. And so the identity that you're, this speaking for myself, I was pursuing this sense of belonging, of productivity, quote unquote, of being, behaving in ways that got me positive validation and positive moral support. And of course, being a patient provided me with all of that. But the deeper I went into, the kind of the therapy relationship with all these well-meaning doctors and therapists, and the more meds I was put on, just the more and more disconnected from my own instincts and autonomy I became without even realizing it. especially because this all began in childhood. So I had no adult, like, agentic sense of self as a baseline to compare it to. Like, I came of age diagnosed and heavily medicated. And so I didn't even know what I was missing because I had no baseline to refer to of like, oh yeah, I remember when I used to feel in the driver's seat of my life and in touch with my body and all. I didn't have that because I grew up on these drugs. So I think it's especially hard for children and adolescents to find their way out of psychiatrization because they don't know what they're missing. They don't have a reference point to how they felt before. It's just like all they know is being a psychiatric patient.
It's incredibly tragic, actually. Like, it's a theft of something so sacred and so profound. Yeah, like when you say that, I feel very sad for your younger self and for all the children on that. As you say, they don't have a baseline. Laura, I need to pause just for 1 minute. Is that okay? I just need to really quickly go to the loo.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, 1 minute.
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem. Oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah, that was really evocative what you just said then about sort of not having a baseline, and that's why it's really difficult for adolescents to compare. So in terms of your journey then, I guess that early period, because when I read the book, I was thinking that you not only had this psychiatrization going on, but that compromises you in sort of fundamental emotional ways that then mean you start drinking heavily, you're sort of smoking pot and doing all kinds of things. You're in destructive relationships, if not quite isolated. There were eating disorders. So what I heard, and I see this in some of the other spaces I mentioned before with parents who have seen me around their adolescence, is that there's then a snowball. It's like, and then that becomes yet another thing to be managed, to be, drugged, to be psychiatrized. And it just seemed to, in some ways, compound on itself. Quite bad.
Yeah. I don't know if you have the whack-a-mole game in arcades in Australia, but you have a mallet and you're hitting one little mole that's popping its head up, and then once you hit it, another one pops up, and then another one. And yeah, it's
I know the game, yes.
Cascading effect of iatrogenic harms that no one's really recognizing as iatrogenic. And yet, of course, at the same time, too, it's giving both the patient and then all the systems in which the patient exists, the family system, the medical system, is giving them all the more purpose and opportunities for, offering services. It's just creating more benefit, you could say, to be a bit cynical, to all the well-meaning professionals surrounding this person because they have all the more work to do.
Yeah, there's a financial incentive in the problem, which makes it by definition a compromised service. And I'll get to how I view that as a therapist in a minute. But and so can you talk a bit about your life in that time when you went to Harvard? And I remember you talked about being in dorm rooms and the women you were with making an intervention, and you were in different relationships. And I just got the sense that you were in this kind of despair that really came to a crescendo with this suicide attempt. So I don't know if you want to speak to that a bit.
Yeah. So my years in college and then my early 20s afterwards were basically just a progressive decline into disability and dysfunction, and I didn't have that. By the time I was through college, I didn't really have any friendships left. But along the way, my roommates tried to help me. I rejected that. And basically, my college experience, the more psychiatrist I became, the less connected I was in any kind of meaningful way to people in my life who weren't paid to be there. And so after I finished college and I had no more structure, because somehow, despite how medicated I was, and I took a year off and was in the hospital, like I things really fell apart. I somehow managed to get relatively okay grades and graduate. Like I don't really remember any of it, but I was able to. And so after college, without that structure of academic expectation, I really spun out and was just seeking relief in any way I could find it, which, as you mentioned, led to me having quite a number of problems with drinking, which I really, in retrospect, I don't think would have happened if I wasn't on a handful of powerful psychiatric drugs. But yeah, through my 20s, life fell more and more apart. I was getting physically sicker and, issues with all kinds of health issues, serious weight gain, and all kinds of metabolic problems, all of that. And socially, I was more and more isolated, disconnected. Mentally and emotionally, I was just spinning out more and more. And eventually, by my mid-20s, I was told that this was happening because, unfortunately, my illness had progressed to treatment-resistant status. So what that meant to me is this treatment I've been turning my life over to for all these years as the one thing that might save me. Professional help and pharmaceutical help and hospitals and programs, all of it. I had been so good at and careful and thoughtful and compliant and hoping that one day it would help me. And now you're telling me that I'm just so defective that even the treatment can't do anything. That to me was a message of total hopelessness. Because I was the only thing I had been holding on to through all those years was that one day treatment would help me, even though it hadn't yet, year after year after year. And so that message left me feeling very sure that this life wasn't worth living anymore if all that was in store for me was this so-called treatment-resistant mental illness. And so I ended up trying to kill myself. And to this day, I think that was a very logical decision to make, given this story that I had been taught about myself.
And then you could trust yourself, and it seems so despairing.
Yeah, that what's the life worth living if it just means psych wards and pills that don't help you and total dependence on your family to take care of you because you can't work, you can't cultivate meaningful relationships. To me, that to this day, that doesn't sound like a life worth living. Of course, the problem was that this was all a bullshit story that I had been taught by this powerful industry of mostly well-meaning people who themselves were kind of indoctrinated into seeing me this way. So it wasn't that this was malicious necessarily at all, especially with the individual doctors and therapists I was encountering. They really cared about me and wanted to help and felt powerless that they couldn't help me.
There is a complicity in that medicalized model of health.
Yes, there is but I think, I've over the years, I've really developed a lot of compassion for, especially the psychiatrists who are in this, because when you spend your most formative educational years being kind of systematically indoctrinated into this medicalized ideology that, I would argue is more of a religious ideology than anything else. You don't even realize what you've lost yourself as a doctor in terms of, your own connection to what it means to be human. Like, I guess by that I mean, let's take the topic of psychiatric force as an example. So every single day around the world, struggling human beings are physically restrained by a doctor and injected against their will with a syringe of a tranquilizing drug that they call antipsychotic. This is called care. This is called treatment. And a doctor doing that to someone, a doctor having, a security guard hold you down so he can violate your body with a syringe of a drug. You can't do that unless you've dehumanized yourself first. You can't dehumanize another person like that unless you yourself have been dehumanized. And so I feel compassion for any human being who has been dehumanized to such a degree that they could do that to another human being. And that might sound strange. And yes, of course, there's complicity, but yeah.
Well, it's a testament to your humanity that it's big enough to find a sympathetic lens through which to understand the very thing you've grown out of and critiqued. Your humanity is big enough to encompass that, which, I think it's a testament to your character.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that. I mean, it's also, you could argue, selfish in the sense that I spent a few years early on after I came off of all these drugs, really angry at all the doctors and therapists I'd seen at the hospitals I'd been to. I felt like a victim of them. And I eventually realized, wow, I'm just as imprisoned by the mental health industry as I was before. Only now I'm not its patient. I'm its victim. And that's its own prison. And if I want to actually be free, I have to make peace with what happened and move beyond it. And so, I do think rehumanizing our society is the work that needs to be done. But it also was for me too, to make peace with it all. For my own freedom, really, I had to.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you make. And I spent a lot of time in my 20s and early 30s in feminist circles. And I saw exactly that, like women genuinely victimized, rape victims, child sexual abuse victims, and so on, that are sometimes attracted to these groups as a way of understanding cultural norms, cultural expectations, power, gendered power relations, but it can become its own entity or its own beast. And I've seen it with divorce too. And, in any arena, if someone flips into the angry, persecuted and never alchemizes that, I think that there's a necessity to be in that place in order to heal, but it's one stop on a road. And if you stay there, you will actually, in many ways, like you say, you're still defined by the phenomenon.
Exactly. It's a stage of grief, really, I think. Yeah.
That's right. So you've come to a new point. In fact, I did pick up a little bit of that anger when you were talking about and human sympathy and understanding as well. When you talked about the last therapist, I'm trying to think of her name. It was Dr. Weinberg and the notes, but she was a little bit cagey about handing them over. But what I loved about that chapter, well, you wrote about her a couple of times, but I'm thinking the last time you wrote about her, where you were like the analyst. You were observing her. So you're writing about your therapy sessions, but you've come to this point of transcending. Well, you've analyzed, you've critiqued, and you've transcended the patient role. So you're there as this sort of agentic figure analyzing her. And I see her getting more and more nervous in the interactions, at least as you're describing it. And I thought, wow, how would I feel in that position as the therapist? And, and anyway, that's possibly a good segue into the question I was going to ask you about whether you felt there was a scope for therapy for the worried well, which is a term, I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but for just discussing ordinary problems out of context when sometimes those problems originate in a context where you can't solve them. So what you say, and I agree with you fully, that family and friends and your own community is the ideal place. And I listened to your interview with Brett Weinstein and I loved it, where he talked about, he always uses these great biological terms, but the novelty problem or hyper novelty problem. That was the term he used. But that he said we're all kind of fucked up in this society because we weren't evolved for this. We were evolved to live in, I think they call it the Dunbar number, 150 people who are loved and biologically connected and sociologically connected and connected through bonds of marriage and religion and so on. And so you talk about that and revivifying that, and I agree with you fully. However, there's a part of me that resists that and says we need to be careful not to romanticize that, because sometimes people are sexually abused in their families. Sometimes people are in noxious communities or workplaces. And sometimes it's the utopian ones that can be the worst, like all that interesting research on cults and alternative communities, how they collapse because there's inevitably a leader who starts sleeping with all the women, or you know what I mean? There's a message promulgated people themselves don't live up to, and so I fully share and have written about and published on a critique of a medicalized version of the Psy industry, let's say broadly. And but I wonder, and obviously I've got a vested interest in this question and I understand my positioning and bias, but whether there isn't a utility to doing that out of context sometimes is precisely what's needed. And I know that that's a modern invention, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad one.
Oh, I think I agree. I think there's something, there can be something of great value in having a person in your life whom you're even paying money to, who can help you work through whatever it might be that you're feeling stuck in or lost in. And I think the thing that makes it complicated is that at the end of the day, my view is that it all comes down to the individual therapist. Let's just use the word therapist, and who they are as a person and how in touch with their instincts they are, how in touch with their emotions they are, how in touch with their shadow side they are. And so my view is that the therapists who are actually truly helpful to people tend to be, at least in what I've seen and heard about, and I have many friends who are therapists, including you, and so the sense I have, just my own perspective, is that a good therapist, A, is someone who's like really in touch with their own shadow side and their own humanity, and B, is oriented around making themselves obsolete to the person as fast as possible. When a person who's working as a therapist has both of those factors, then I think it can be really, and of course the kind of therapy they're doing. Like if I happened to basically only have therapeutic relationships that were premised on me being mentally ill, quote unquote, and me having this incurable thing in my brain. And so therapy quickly became just this like futile exercise in talking about my problems all the time. Like it never occurred to me that therapy might actually be a temporary tool that I would use to like work through something and emerge on the other side of it. I just assumed, I'll be in therapy for the rest of my life because I have a chemical imbalance in my brain and it's really being managed by these medications. But, I need to talk about my symptoms with someone. And so, it needs to be a professional. Like that was how I came to therapy. So I have no doubt that if I hadn't medicalized myself, and if I'd happened to have a therapeutic relationship with someone who didn't see me as a list of symptoms and themselves were in touch with all these things and that I'd mentioned before and wanted to help me get to a place where I felt I didn't need them, it could have been totally life-changing. And so I mean, what do you think? It does come down to the individual person too? I mean, what's your sense of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, it's interesting, but I mean, there's a few different therapists that are anti-therapy. Like I'm thinking of Daniel Mackler, who rejected therapy, and, people like Petra Bueskens, who have been highly critical of the sort of pharmaceutical industrial complex and so on. And Kelly Brogan, and I share that worldview, I guess. I'm totally critical. And that's, sorry, just to segue for a minute or digress, that has been something that's been a problem for me at times. So I've had prospective clients come to me who announce, so everyone self-diagnoses now on on Google, you know, or YouTube or something. I've got ADHD, and I think I need to be careful. I might even edit this, but I think all of those are inventions and heuristics at best. So someone might be depressed. So I believe I'm not so sure about the proliferation of ADHD and so on. I don't really believe in it. And when I said that, he got angry with me.
Yes.
So that's the other thing now. People are so propagandized, and I feel it's important that I'm honest, but increasingly it's risky. So I've been, again, I'm going to cut this out, but I've been moving toward thinking I repackage as coach, or even just build my writing stuff up again, because, you know, I've been in academia and I'm doing this because it's more compatible with mothering, and I love it. I'm absorbed by the human condition and interested in human beings, but I see the problems with the monetization of it. How can that not create a conflict of interest? But I made a conscious decision, and it's interesting because my son asked me that very question. If this is how you make money, you must want people to be unhappy or something like that, you know, like this child can see that. And I said, I made a decision early on that I want people to be happy. And so, or, you know, not necessarily happy, but contentment and the capacity to live with unhappiness. I mean, I think I'd like to revisit that, actually. I think the way you speak about that is just absolutely, it's evocative and powerful. And I agree with it 100%, because we have this happiness cult, don't we, where happiness is like the baseline, and that's absurd. I think Freud has a quote, a famous quote about happiness dropping in like an uninvited guest, but that might be libido. But his point being, it's not the standard state of existence. And, you know, Barbara Ehrenreich's book that I love, Bright-Sided, when she got cancer and everyone expected her to join the wellness industry and be kind of happy, and just this inability to process, well, shadow emotions, but negative emotions, I think is key. But back to my son's point and your point, I think a therapist has to make a conscious decision, and they won't be a good therapist if they don't, to align with that person's best outcome. And that, absolutely, I agree with you, is the fastest outcome, or the outcome that best works for that person. And ideally, they're not developing a dependency or having a crutch. And that's, I think you just have to be invested in that and separate it out, you know?
Yep. Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I'm for years now, I've been working in what I can call a consulting capacity in people's lives. I charge money for my time. People pay me. And so I think in and of itself, I mean, the reality is this is the world that we live in, a world where we have collectively decided that to equate time with money, essentially. And, you know, sure, we could have a deep, fun, expansive conversation about like what a society would look like where that wasn't the case, but it is the case. We have mortgages to pay and children's tuitions to fund and all of that. So, you know, I made the decision years ago that I've gained this body of knowledge and experience through a lot of hard work, and I've developed a kind of expertise that doesn't come from the institution. It comes from having lived it myself and from immersing myself in countless thousands of hours of self-education and exploration. So I have something of value to offer people. I need to charge money because I'm offering my time. And so, yeah, the word consulting is the word that I landed on, because I'm making it really clear to people, like, I don't have something that you need. Like, you're not incomplete or inadequate until such time comes as I give you something that you're in need of. I just have a skill set and an experience set that maybe you don't have. And I'm going to offer this to you, not from a hierarchical, you know, top down, I'm an expert over you, but rather I have a lot of accumulated knowledge from investing a lot of time into this, and it might feel helpful for you because maybe you haven't been able to invest the same amount of time and you need support. So here it is. Take it or leave it. And if you feel like you never need to talk to me again, amazing. I'm here if you want to. So I think in and of itself, being paid to help someone else, I think is just an inevitability of the world we live in. And like you said, it's about your own orientation to it as a human being, offering this paid help. And just keeping in touch with your own shadow side. And as you navigate your relationship as a consultant or a coach or a therapist or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. And I mean, Freud, again, I thought I quoted Freud a few times, but he said therapy is a cure through love. And I think if you don't actually form a deep affinity with your patients or clients, it doesn't actually work. So that psychiatrized model of objectifying, of commodifying the relationship
Yes.
and medicalizing it, I think that's anathema to well-being per se.
Yes.
So what I'm doing probably looks not dissimilar to what you're doing, although I tend to work, over a period of, anywhere between 6 months to a couple of years. And in the case of my clients, because you hold the story, sometimes I won't hear from them for 8 years, 10 years, and then they come back because I've been in practice for 25 years now, a small practice, but I've been in practice that length of time. And so there's that kind of return when you hold a story. But I agree with you that that sort of, it's the orientation of the therapist. And so what I was going to say about Daniel Mackler and some of those anti-therapist therapists, I'd probably share that position. So, I think my best friend is my therapist. No, but, I mean, you have to do a certain amount of supervision. But I look hard and find someone who kind of shares that worldview. So my supervisor is very anti-medicalized, and we share views on all the key things that the Brownstone talks about. And, so I feel as if, finding that has been quite important, because there's also a kind of status with the professionalization of this. I mean, you speak about that again in your book from the position of the young patient, but just once the white coat goes on, I mean, no psychotherapist has that. That's more the psychiatry world. But still, there's this sort of the letters after the name, the professionalization, the expert class. And I agree with you that it's got a religious component. It's like priestly. There's a language that goes with it. There's a clothing, there's status, there's the way, office hours are kept, all of that.
The sacrament of taking your pills.
Yes, the sacrament of taking your pills. That's right. And so I think you're right. And even the language, I mean, these categories are heuristic. They're entirely subjective. They're not biological in the way that, I don't know, cardiology is or something. Once upon a time, not that long ago, we said if women went to university, their uteruses would shrink, and the early DSM-4, the early psychoanalysis was based on the quote unquote hysteric, and that was about the womb in hysteria, hysterectomy. It was like founded on this idea of the mad woman. But I think the other piece there is that the categories themselves reflect the culture. So, homosexuality was pathologized, or and now it's not. And so we see that they're not just independent, objective, scientific categories. They're totally culturally invented, culturally inflected heuristics. And it's like people in the profession don't really get that. And I find that surprising.
It's wild that someone who's gone through so many years of medical school and residency and training can, presumably learning about the scientific method and all how and measurable objective reality, can then at the same time sit down in front of someone with a completely subjective questionnaire of, on a scale of 1 to 4, how sad have you felt in the last 2 weeks? And then think in their head, okay, now, this patient has this incurable brain problem. It's wild, the dissonance in thinking. And I think, the takeaway for me that I want all people to arm themselves with is just the importance of stepping back to ask questions about every single bit of information you're told about yourself, and recognizing that it's story. It is story, that these words themselves are invented ways of, symbolizing or categorizing experiences that can't be defined in any kind of objective way. I mean, to say, oh, I have depression. Like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, what do you mean I have depression? I have depression. I mean, it's such a meaningless word, such a mushy word. And yet we talk that way with each other, and we throw these meaningless words around, not stepping back to be like, what do I actually mean when I say that? Or what is this person meaning when she says that? And I'd like to ask people, well, what does that feel like? Is it in your body? Is it an ache in your bones? Is it, I want to kind of offer an opportunity for this person I'm talking to just pause for a minute and be like, what am I even meaning when I say these things? Because as someone who used that language unquestioningly through the most formative years of my life, I now see what a disservice I was doing to myself in like both understanding myself in a meaningful way, and then also in being able to be connected to myself and the world around me. And, I just learning about the DSM. I don't know if you guys even you probably don't even use, you just probably use ICD over there.
Both. Yeah. I used the DSM when I was doing my own psychotherapy training, not in the same way that a psychiatrist would. It wasn't a Bible. We did read it though, and we did have to study categories. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I just never, a lot of, obviously when I was a kid, I couldn't really question anything. I was so young and my capacities were just developing. But, through my 20s, it never once occurred to me to pause and step back and ask any questions about anything that was being told to me. And like that, and I think that's quite a common experience of a lot of people who just passively receive what they're told by medical experts. And it doesn't even occur to them to ask a question, let alone that they should be asking questions. And like, why? That's the phenomenon I want my book to spark conversations and debate around. Because as soon as I started asking questions, like I never looked back. Because once I actually began to educate myself, I realized, holy cow, everything that I've been taught to believe about myself is basically bullshit. And it just took me stopping and pausing and asking questions.
It's so powerful that you did that. And I was thinking your book is bookended by this kind of, I think, almost spiritual rite of passage as a 13-year-old. Like if you think about that moment, there was something transcendent about it, even though it was terrifying. Yep. Something even, you might have been selected for the shaman class once upon a time. With the experience of that, it was transcendent, where you actually depersonalize. So your ego and boundaries break
It
down.
transcended the self. Yeah.
That's right. You become nobody and everybody at once. And then at this point, at 27, when you have this kind of realization, and it's like these are the two bookends, it seems to me, of your story. And then you grow out of this like long-term psychiatrization and, having yourself hijacked really by, at so many levels, physiologically by the medication, then the self-medication you were doing and self-harm you were doing, the way in which it hijacked your personality, your development and your consciousness, really. And then you have a kind of, I don't know, you've got this incredible strength of character that you could break through that, even with it all defining you, and kind of begin this journey. It's like a hero or heroine's journey, really, that you've made to get to the other side of that. But it starts with something evocative. If you want to go a bit woo and a bit spiritual, like it was quote unquote meant to be. I don't know how that went.
And it was my plan. I mean, I wanted to begin and end in a deeper transcendent or spiritual or whatever word you want to use way, for sure. Because to me, that's what this is all about. And the mirror scene, I discovered that I was nobody and missed that I was everybody. So I just had the first half and that's why I got so fucked up, I think. And then at the end, realizing that I was everybody, that was the resolution. And what's wild is I do think the fieriness of who I was, of who I am. I'm a very intense person. It's of course what got me psychiatrized, and it's also what got me out. And in the US version of my book, which is different than the one you have over there, it's an old the cover has an old painting from the 19th century of it's called The Hesitant Fiancé by Auguste Tolmouche. And it's a woman in a wedding dress sitting in a big sumptuous chair with this look of staring at you, the viewer, with this very intense look in her eyes. And I picked the painting and I wanted it on the cover because my anger is what got me into this mess and it's what got me out. And what's hilarious, Petra, is that some of the responses to my book from psychiatrists, male psychiatrists, might I add, who've read my book and written critiques of it online, their conclusion is that after reading my whole book, the whole thing, all my critiques, everything, their conclusion is that I was misdiagnosed bipolar, that I really was actually borderline all along, that I am borderline now, and that the reason I got so harmed by the mental health industry is because I was so borderline that I ended up having this extreme all or nothing relationship with psychiatry. And I went all into it, threw myself into it. That's why I got messed up. And then I rejected it and I abandoned it. And I did the typical borderline, quote unquote, thing that we borderline women do. And this all or none, black and white. That's literally the analysis that multiple male psychiatrists have had of my book, which I find hilarious and wonderful because it only reinforces the message of my book all the more.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. Laura, I have to let my daughter in who's just come back.
And I need to run in pretty shortly because I have to help take the kids to camp.
Okay, right. Can I have one more minute? I wanted to talk to you about the way you see yourself as still having the issue, but I'll just open the door and come back.
Sure.
Sorry, hang on.
No problem.
I'll talk in a minute now.
What did you say?
Oh, that was just my daughter came back.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. I was hoping that we wouldn't have the interruption, but yeah, this is mothering. And you were taking your kids to camp. Wow. Oh, of course, because it's summer there. So I'm all rugged up. It's the middle of winter, but you're middle of summer. You do look sun-kissed. Yeah.
Yes, I've been in the sun a lot. I don't wear sunscreen, so I'm dark now.
Oh, good. Lots of vitamin D. Yeah, I just thought, no, that was really evocative what you said then about the reviews. And I did see one, but it was interesting. It was on Robert Whittaker's blog where you used to blog, and it was sympathetic, but he said, and I thought, I wonder if there's something in that. It was the first one. It was the first critique that I thought there might be something to it. But he just said, Laura is herself quite exceptional in a lot of ways, her education, her erudition, and not everyone who's transitioning off is going to have the kind of rapid move to health and well-being and achievement that she had, something along those lines. And I thought, that might be true. It doesn't take anything away from your message, but I think he was saying it was a compliment, but he was saying this isn't going to be everyone's story. I mean, I wonder what your response to that is. Did you read?
I don't think send it to me. I don't think I saw that. And these kind, I find myself in this funny position when people read my book or hear me share my story, and then they conclude that all is well and I'm well now and thriving and happy, and they kind of have this impression that everything's great now, and and I just find that's so fascinating because I never actually say that. What I say is that my life is full of meaning, and I feel deeply connected to myself and my body and my instincts and other people and nature and my family and purpose and meaning. but that doesn't mean I'm happy and everything's great. And I actually have plenty of emotional pain and like really crazy stuff going on in my head on a daily basis. And the main difference is that I just am not fazed by it anymore. And I'm not afraid of it. And, that's not to say that my life hasn't gotten dramatically more vital. I mean, that's the thing. My life is vitalized. I feel vital today. And I did not feel that when I was a psych patient. And so, a lot of healing has happened, quote unquote, in the sense that a lot of my physical issues that I had while I was on these drugs have resolved themselves, but plenty haven't. I have intense like sensitivities to certain foods and substances and chemicals, and I still have gut issues. A lot of it, I think, is because I haven't invested the time I could be investing potentially in resolving them, because life is busy and I have a stepson and a son, but a lot of it I think is lasting injury, probably in some way, lasting effects of long-term psychiatric drug use. But I'm not bothered by it, and I don't see it as a problem I have to fix. Just as I don't see my intense anxiety and sometimes, irritability as a problem to fix. It's just a signal from deep within me that things are, perhaps out of alignment in some way between me and the world around me. Or maybe not. Maybe it's actually because I'm in alignment and there's a lot to feel emotional pain in response to. But to the point about, Laura's story is an exceptional one, which I don't think it is. But what I'm, of course, willing to acknowledge is that somehow through all of it, I happen to be able to write in a way that people connect with. And I don't take any credit for that. I think I just happened to be born a person who writes.
Yeah, you're beautiful.
And so that, I think, maybe not everyone has been born with that. Maybe their communicative gifts are in other areas. Mine just happened to be in writing, and that obviously has helped enable opportunities for me to write my blog back at the beginning, eventually to write my book, which of course have then opened up all these other opportunities. And so I acknowledge that not everyone has had that path. My background obviously helped play a part in that too. And the resources my family had to send me, you know what I'm saying. But I don't think I'm exceptional at all, really. And I find that when people try to paint me as that, it's almost like, whether they realize it or not, it's almost like they're building some kind of permission structure for the industry to keep going along the way it is. Because like there are so many people who don't have a chance to get out like Laura. So let's keep doing what we're doing, because not everyone would be able to make their way out. I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit cynical there, but
no, I agree.
I don't buy that I'm exceptional.
Well, I think what you're saying is, as I hear you, is that the idea that anybody needs psych meds is, it is just plain wrong. We're built with the capacity to feel a whole lot of emotions, and we will likely feel the ones that are relevant to our circumstances. We'll be angry if there's situations that are eliciting anger. That doesn't mean that it can't get a life of its own if it's prolonged. Anything that's prolonged can then become, like, prolonged grief becomes quote unquote depression, like we were talking about before. But essentially it's sadness without remit. And it might be that the circumstances are leading to that or something else, but then it's about, an internal resolution, not something external. And I think what you're saying there is that you're not exceptional in the sense that you might have these gifts and talents and abilities that have taken you over here, but that's not unlike anybody who pursues their gifts and talents. But you're saying, in the sense of being a psychiatric patient, what I hear you saying, anyone has the capacity to transition off and get a life of vitality. And I love that word, because that word is not happiness. It's not tantamount to like never having problems. In fact, isn't that the definition of psychological health? Like I often say when clients have come to me, it's not the problem that's the issue, it's how it's managed. So let's explore how you're currently managing it and how you might otherwise want to manage it. And the same goes for me. I mean, I think it's interesting, the assumption that therapists don't have problems, when actually the idea of the wounded healer is central. Many therapists have been wounded quite deeply and remain so, and not metabolizing it, which can be its own problem, like, you know, the chef who eats pizza or the surgeon who smokes, or, you know what I mean? I think there's that therapy too. But I think the idea that the expert somehow isn't living in the same world we're all living in, of crisis and social breakdown and, you know, a split in the narratives and growing authoritarianism. Of course we are. Relationship breakdown, substance abuse.
Yeah. And just to quickly return to what you were saying about people not actually needing these drugs, which I agree with. No one needs a psychiatric drug in the same way someone with type 1 diabetes needs insulin. That being said, these drugs can feel helpful for people, especially when used in the short term and for a very specific purpose that is let me reframe that. Like, when we look at these drugs not as medicines or medications that are so-called treating a so-called illness, but we look at them as psychoactive substances that disrupt normal function in the body, and that disruption might feel helpful sometimes. Like then you open up the possibility of having an informed relationship with these drugs that could feel useful to you. So, for example, if you get like panic attacks when you fly in an airplane, taking a benzodiazepine, not because you think you have something wrong with your brain, but because you know that a benzodiazepine is going to tranquilize and kind of disable your panic response, so you'll feel calmer temporarily. Like, to me, that's an informed use of the drug, and you're taking it for the flight. You're not going to take it every day indefinitely because you think you're fixing an imbalance. I think we need to make space for that nuance in our culture, which people all the time try to claim I'm not doing. People are calling me anti-medication all the time, which I'm not. If we shift the language that we use to think about these drugs and talk about these drugs to a more common sense, scientific one, by which I mean, like, how do these drugs actually affect the body? And let's call them that. So it's a tranquilizer or it's a stimulant. You know, these drugs generally fall into one of those two classes. Then you can actually think about them in a meaningful, informed way and decide if the risks and trade-offs are worth it to you, given your life circumstances. And people are trying to paint me in this extremist corner where I'm anti-med, quote unquote. I'm not. I'm about informed choice. And I don't think any of us are making informed choices right now about this, simply because of the language we use to talk about these drugs. But that doesn't mean it is impossible to be more informed about them. And that's what I hope my book will help fuel.
That seems a good note to end it on. I think your book does do that. Yeah. And I agree with you about the use of it. It's like, you know, using a sleeping tablet. I did that in the brownstone to try and turn myself around. It didn't really work. And I remember looking at you being dazed and confused and laughing our heads off. But absolutely, using something like that strategically can be helpful for a short period. And I think it's a misconstrual of your message to suggest that you're saying otherwise. You're just saying we're living in this kind of culture and ideology of the patient, and it's linked to a corrupt big pharma system. And that we know. Yeah, or maybe you're not saying that, but I think that.
No, I'm with you for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been such an honor to be on to talk. We could have talked for hours more, but there are kids to tend to.
There are kids to tend to. Yeah, wonderful to see you, Laura. And I'll let you know. I usually take about 2 weeks to get it up and running, but it should be posted soon.
Thanks.
I might see you at Utah.
I hope you come. Yes, we will. We will both be. Cooper and I will be there. That would be so great to see you there, because it's probably closer for you to get to, right? Because you would than it is the East Coast, right? Because you come from the West.
Yes,
right?
I do come
Yeah.
from the West. Like I'm a bit scared of flying, so I stopped every few hours. I don't
That's
know if I
right.
told you that. Yeah, I stopped in Fiji and I had a bit of a holiday, and I stopped in Christmas Island and then Hawaii and then LA, and it was just built in. It didn't cost me more. I was just able to get stopovers, but it just helped me sort of breathe. Well, I find it a bit scary, and that I just feel like only another 2 hours and I'll be landing on physical Earth.
Well, and talk about such a natural, like, it's so unnatural to fly in a fucking airplane. Like, it goes against every fundamental primal instinct in us. Like, so if anything, I feel like that's the healthiest response to anyone who's like dissociated from flying across a massive ocean in a metal box that's being like burned by the sun and like filled with chemicals, and anyone who isn't having a hard time, like, I dissociate. We're dissociating. You're the only one who's not.
And you tell people and they go, that's crazy. And I think it's less crazy than flying for 22 hours and pretending I'm not terrified. You're like,
you need to keep that in. Don't edit that. That's so great.
all right. So good to see you.
So good to see you. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Let's
Yeah. Can you post
sometime?
I would love that. I'd love that. Let's do it.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Great. To see
Okay.
you. All right.
You too.
Bye.
Talk soon.
Happy
Bye.
camping. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Veriditas Podcast. If you'd like to support the show, please subscribe to my Substack, also called Veriditas. You can find most of the ideas or the references spoken about in the show linked in the show notes. See you next time.